What you're about to hear is part 2 of a crossover episode I did with the Online Great Books podcast discussing Jacques Maritain's classic essay, Art and Scholasticism. So if you haven't heard of part 1 yet, I linked to that in the show notes, so go listen to that first before you listen to this one. It's kind of an interesting experience going on this podcast because one of the hosts, Karl, is a Byzantine Catholic, and then the other host, Scott, is not Catholic, and their audience isn't necessarily Catholic. So it was kind of cool getting a chance to discuss this classic work by a Thomist philosopher for a non-Catholic audience. So in this part of the discussion, we get to what Maritain has to say about the role of beauty in art, beauty as a transcendental, the role of intuition and how we experience artistic beauty, more important than emotion or intellectual analysis, what contemplating art can teach us, and some fun little diversions about whether photography is a fine art. Scott and I get into a debate over Glenn Gould, a pianist I love and he hates, and craft beers. So one more thing, if you end up going over and checking out the Online Great Books podcast after listening to this, fair warning, Scott can be a little rough around the edges, occasionally uses some coarse language, although I think he might be trying to get better on that. I told him I was going to say this. So again, fair warning on that, but hope you enjoyed this discussion.
Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Welcome back to Online Great Books Podcast. Dear listener, this is Brett. I am the producer, and today Scott and Karl welcome Thomas Meares from Catholic Culture Podcast to this discussion of the 1920 book Art and Scholasticism by Jacques Maritain. Today is a very substantial discussion that deals more with the contents of the book. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for listening, and we'll get right to it.
You guys want to talk about beauty?
Yes, please.
One of the cool things about this, the way he starts with, just art, broadly speaking, and then talks about the fine arts is it's kind of like where he says later that, fine arts are to art in general as man is to the genus animal. It's like art in general is, but it's like more so. So the stuff he says about intuition, the stuff he says about connaturality and the kind of forming yourself into the thing that's the object of your action. Those things are just like amplified when it comes to the fine arts, precisely because they're not being made for something useful. So they are kind of like, it's almost like the fine arts are able to be art more purely and properly speaking because they are just all about that formal end, rather than sort of, the formal end is the good of the object, but really it's to get these people across from, Carthage to Rome or whatever on the ship. Yeah, so art, we could start with the Thomistic definition of, he has a couple definitions of beauty, but one important thing about beauty, id quod visum placet. Actually, let me just read this. St. Thomas, who is as simple as he was wise, defined the beautiful as that which, being seen, pleases. These 4 words say all that is necessary, a vision, that is to say, an intuitive knowledge, and a delight. The beautiful is what gives delight, not just any delight, but delight in knowing. Not the delight peculiar to the act of knowing, but a delight which superabounds and overflows from this act because of the object known. If a thing exalts and delights the soul by the very fact that it is given to the soul's intuition, it is good to apprehend, it is beautiful. So that's a really great gloss on that which being seen pleases, because it immediately makes clear, when he says seen, Aquinas, when he says seen, he's not just talking about literal seeing. He's talking about an intuition of the soul, and he's not just talking about the sense of sight, although he is kind of limiting it to sight and hearing as the kind of the most intelligible of the senses. And then pleases it's not just a sense pleasure, although it proceeds by means of a sense pleasure. It is ultimately the pleasure of contemplating a form in the soul. So I don't know. Any thoughts on that, guys?
A few. Yeah. So
Didn't even say that.
It's a. I have too many thoughts. I wish they'd leave me alone sometimes. It's our translation renders plaket as gives joy rather than delight, but either way it works. Fine arts are not for the sake. So take my plumbing example. That wonderful weld that your plumber does is not for the sake of beauty. It's for the sake of making your plumbing work. So it's got and it might be beautiful. It might be a good example of its kind. It might give joy to look at it, but that's not its point. The fine arts don't really have a point except delight.
Right.
Which is part of the reason they're neglected these days, because, what's the monetary value of delight? How does it help your GNP that you have beautiful cities?
Right.
I'm not a fan of cities, but if you have one, it should be beautiful.
Right.
Yeah,
well, we talked about Art Deco
yeah.
on the film podcast.
It's the only style that
Tulsa
city should be built in.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad we're all on the same page as far as modern architecture is concerned. Yeah, so I love there's so much packed into that, and that's how Aquinas is. There's so much that which being seen pleases. There's so much that you can draw just from that, and he's not just and Thomas is not just talking about artistic beauty, but that's the context in which we're discussing this. I think one of the really important things is that this is an intuitive knowledge, It involves a sort of judgment, but it's not like discursive reasoning where you're step by step analyzing something. You don't prove that something's beautiful by analysis.
Gosh.
You might be able to understand its beauty, or you might be able to perceive its beauty better by looking at it a little more detailed and kind of stepping back. But fundamentally, this is an intuitive experience, but it's an intellectual intuition.
I want to get ever so slightly political.
Okay.
So buckle up. The decline of art these days, I think, is because it is didactic.
Mm-hmm.
And so people think, they have these lists of whatever the hot political takes are. These are the things that the movie has to hit, for example. And if it hits all of those, therefore, it's beautiful. And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Yeah. Beauty is a thing apart from that. If I've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Isn't it a good movie? And then it bombs.
Right.
See that happen all the time.
Do you guys remember what Plato says about this in the Phaedo? There's a little line that I love, and I don't think this is what he was necessarily getting at, but I connected it with what you were just saying. I think that if there is anything beautiful besides the beautiful itself, it is beautiful for no other reason than that it shares in the beautiful, and I say so with everything. I no longer understand or recognize those other sophisticated causes, and if someone tells me that a thing is beautiful because it has a bright color or shape or any such thing, I ignore these or these other reasons, for all these confuse me. But I simply, naively, and perhaps foolishly cling to this, that nothing else makes it beautiful other than the presence of, or the sharing in, or however you may describe its relationship to that beautiful we mentioned, for I will not insist on the precise nature of the relationship, but that all beautiful things are beautiful by the beautiful. And I think it really is just that simple.
Yeah. But Socrates, how do you know it's beautiful? Says Thomas.
Because it pleases when you see it, man.
Yeah.
Given the gloss the Maritain gives to it, which I think is the correct way of going about it, we're not talking about a subjectivism here or a sensualism.
Yeah. And now Thomas does have some ideas on Thomas Aquinas, not Thomas Miris, on what makes things.
It was very confusing.
Yeah. Well, what makes things beautiful: integrity, proportion, and clarity. It needs to wholeness. It needs to be proportional. It needs to be shiny.
Yeah.
Not like Who's that painter that paints terrible paintings?
Miro?
The painter of light.
Oh, Thomas Kincaid, yeah. Poor guy.
Are they terrible?
Always gets...
Well, I don't know. Do you like him?
Well, I don't like them.
There's something off about it.
Yeah, it's like uncanny.
I've got a good essay about this, why he's bad. I'll send you later.
Well, he might be bad.
I think in every one of those cottages that he painted, that's where Baba Yaga lives. You know, that the witch is out there in that cottage.
Well, this essayist, Gregory Wolfe, said, he's trying to paint a world without a fall. But it's like in a dishonest way. That's what the sentimentality of it is. So yeah, what is it? Integrity, proportion. I always forget one of the three whenever I try.
Integrity, proportion, clarity.
Yeah, Maritain gives the highest importance to clarity. Other people have criticized him. Umberto Eco, I think, has a book on Aquinas where he criticizes how Maritain puts clarity as most important. My friend James Matthew Wilson, who I mentioned earlier, has a beautiful book called The Vision of the Soul, and he has a chapter on sort of arguing for proportion as the most important of the three. Maybe they're like the Trinity, and no one is more important than the other. But yeah, do we have? I'm trying to find where the description of those is given, like what Aquinas means by each one of those.
A certain splendor is indeed, according to all the ancients, the essential character of beauty. Claritas est de ratione pulchritudinis. I should just read the English, not the Latin. There is a brightness concerning the matter of beauty. Light beautifies, because without light all is ugly. It is the splendor of intelligibility.
Intelligibility.
True splendor, said the Platonists, is a splendor of order, said St. Augustine, adding that unity is the form of all beauty. Splendor of form, said St. Thomas, with a metaphysician's precision of language. For form, that is to say, the principle determining the peculiar perfection of everything which is, constituting and completing things in their essence and their qualities. Let me just finish this. The ontological secret, so to speak, of their innermost being, their spiritual essence, their operative mystery, is above all the peculiar principle of intelligibility, the peculiar clarity of everything.
Yeah.
See, revealing form.
Splendor form A, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is good. I was thinking of examples.
Yeah, so a number of people have sort of glossed these differently. What does he mean by radiance? What does he mean by integrity? What does he mean by proportion? I don't know that we need to analyze those too closely, but one of the things Maritain points out is that integrity and proportion are not about imitating an ideal type or representing some external object accurately, but they're about the requirements of that given work. So it's not like, oh, this is clear because it realistically portrays that guy, that model, this painting, because it's a realistic portrait. That's not what the clarity means. For example, these are things that like inhere in the work itself as an object, as an addition to reality, essentially.
Yeah, so a friend of Maritain's, Edith Stein, makes some comments about this in her book, Finite and Eternal Being. She talks about paintings. She talks about a painting of Napoleon, and that it doesn't really matter how accurate it is to the physical appearance of Napoleon. That's not the point of the painter. The point is to get you to grasp something of the form of Napoleon. What was he really like? So it's revelatory of the form, it's not a picture. Or I'm thinking of one of my favorite paintings is a portrait that Renoir did. Oh, I can't remember the name of it. It's in Philadelphia. In the museum in Philadelphia, and it's this perfect painting of this, maybe a 12-year-old girl, and you look at her and you feel like you know her. And so for me it's like, what is, or heck, one of those little studies of haystacks in the light, which we have here in Chicago. Let me get you every single formal aspect of the way that, I'm going to show you every single way that light and weather can play on a stack of hay.
I saw those when I was there. Yeah. Beautiful.
And so revealing to you the form of hayness, I guess, or something of the form of light and weather.
Yeah, depending on the art form, the beauty of the work is not going to be wholly detached from like the external object that it represents, and yet it's not like a condition. Its beauty is not like a condition of a realistic portrayal. Maritain's quite hard on realism.
Very hard on it.
And one of the reasons he defends certain tendencies in modern art is because he thinks, they're attempting with, however much success or lack thereof to recover something of the kind of the spiritual that you might have found in more primitive or medieval art in one way or another.
It's very interesting that he is so hard on realism. But I often wonder if photography is actually a fine art. To take a picture of something. Is that actually an artistic work? Are you bringing your habitus, your intellect to bear on that and then creating something new and beautiful and wonderful, whatever, as a result of that? I don't know.
I think most of the time it's not. I think it can be. And I think there's probably a lot of great photography that's somewhere in between, where it's like there is an art to it, but is more the art of capturing what's there visually. I don't know.
So is the art then the art of recording, or is it a fine art?
Right.
And
right.
I would say in almost all cases, it's going to be that of the recorder, the visual clerk. So if that's the case, then
and it reveals a weakness in realistic painting.
Right.
I would say that's a service that photography has rendered.
Right. I think that's right. Now, Karl loves to take a photo.
I do. I'm trying to look for one. That's where you're hearing me click. Bresson, that's the guy. Has this photo of a bicycle going past stairs. I'm going to link it.
Okay.
And he didn't create it. So it's not quite an act of making, but it's an act of recognizing that this is very cool. You know how the line of the motion of the bicycle follows the line of the stairs curling around, and it's just a neat little picture. And
I mean, he arranged it, even if he didn't physically arrange it. He arranged to take the photo at that moment. He saw something. It's like he made that moment into something that it wouldn't have otherwise
I don't know.
been.
Maybe he's just standing up at the top of the stairs saying, this is an interesting set of stairs. I'm going to take some photos. And then the bicycle goes by. And then, aha. So that's the moment you say, that's revealing something. But
there's definitely composition. Like there's composition in this photo for sure.
But nowadays, especially, I don't know what his practice was, but nowadays with digital cameras, you can take infinity pictures. Yeah. And then you pull them up on Darktable or something and you say, oh, that one.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little different than, say, an oil painting where you have to set and you're creating the whole thing from nothing. So it's an odd kind of an art, but I still think it's an art.
Yeah. I mean, a garden is beautiful if it's good. A gardener is an artist. How often are gardeners fine artists with the gift, with that kind of level of gift, or are they sort of like following a craft that kind of pretty much guarantees you'll end up with something that's pretty and pleasant to walk around in? Or like designing a car, there are certain rules that will result in something that looks cool, or even architecture, not every architect has to be, there's canons of architecture that you can follow and you will come up with something that is beautiful. But it's essentially an imitation of pre-existing forms. So, photography might also, I don't know. Yeah, there's some gray areas. And too, there's also arts that we consider to be arts that aren't the art of the craftsman, but also don't aim at beauty as its fine end. Like Maritain I don't think he considers the novel to be an art of the beautiful, to be an art with beauty as its primary end. I could be wrong about that, but it's still an art it's still not it's a creative art,
It's a creative art. Is it a
Good.
fine art? All arts are creative.
I don't think so.
Is it a fine art, Karl? Photography?
Well, is its purpose to delight? Then I would say yes.
Well, the purpose of the shaker chair is to delight the bum as well.
But that's tactile rather than intellectual.
Is the photographer, is he practicing the art of the curator? Like, is he making something new in a formal sense, or is he recording a form that already exists? Of course, a photograph is a new form, but I don't want to jump too ahead because I was about to get something that needs more context to explain. But maybe we should. I don't know. We could go down a whole rabbit hole about every art form.
But you grabbed it. The reason I brought up the thing about photography, I'm not sure it's a fine art, Karl. I mean, you have to be the finest of all possible photographers with the most pointed and well-developed of habitus in order to make photography a fine art. Otherwise, you're a curator or...
I've seen it, but it's rare, I think that photo you sent us, Karl, is beautiful. I don't know if that guy's an artist or what, but like... It's a pretty good photo. I'd have it hanging on my wall, but it's hard to answer. I don't think there's a universal answer to that question because photography serves so many different purposes. It's like, is architecture a fine art?
No.
Well, there's a lot of architects who aren't artists, and they're still architects. I mean, they're artists in the scholastic sense, but they're not making something beautiful or. I don't know. See, each art form is distinct, and Maritain is sort of talking about art generically here, but these definitions apply, kind of like more or less, depending on the art form, I would say, and there's an interesting conversation you could have about any one of them.
I don't know. I find photography fascinating, and it does give delight to me.
Karl's outraged.
It is not quite making.
No.
Well, I mean, this guy you sent us just now, he's really cool. I'd say it's beautiful. You know, is it beautiful because it's art, or is it beautiful? I don't know. Is he making something? I don't know. But I think when you get to film something like that, there's more going on. But
hold on, wait. Photography isn't art, but film is?
Well, I mean, like a film, like a storytelling, narrative film, or not just like recording.
Well, so we have a problem here. Fritz Long, that directed and ostensibly recorded Metropolis. We did the show on your Criterion show about Metropolis. Like there's the act of actually, rolling the film and capturing the images. Okay, so that's one thing. But there is a creative fine art aspect, which was the set design, the costume, writing the screenplay, designing all of the lighting, all of that stuff. Right? So if photography is going to be a fine art, I would say that the subject matter would have to be arranged and created. Like if you happen to see a child on a bicycle and snap that photograph that is captivating for whatever reason, you are a recorder and you are an able clerk. Poor Karl.
Yeah. But it may be that it almost requires the gift of the artist to do that, even if you're not making something, to be able to see, because that sees a quote. There's a quote from Rodin in this book on how the artist sees with the eye grafted onto his soul, and so I think that there's a vision to be able to do really excellent photography that approaches the level of fine art, asymptotically, as it were. Like you would at least have to have that vision, even if you're applying it to something that is perhaps less than a fine art. I think that there's still something of the same gift at work.
I think that's okay. It's still not a fine art.
There was a war photographer. I think he got the famous photos from D-Day.
Capra.
Something about, maybe. Photography is, being there and aperture of 8.0. You know, that you be there, you take the photos, and I gave you a link to Vivian Meyer, who I think is the best photographer I've seen. And I'm not an expert on this. We have some members at OGB that do this for a living. I just do it as a hobby. You're walking around the city with your little brownie and you're taking pictures. You have to be connatural to the form, the beauty that's around you and the light, and figure, oh, that's a picture. That's a picture. That's a picture. You're not setting it up. You're not making it, but you're taking what's there. You're taking a snapshot of being is how I think of good photography. A snapshot of being that if you're really good at it is going to be revelatory.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to be, somewhat generous here, and I
photographers would be mad at Scott, but I won't be.
Well,
I watched Birth of a Nation this weekend.
Yeah,
that was kind of intense, and I watched Intolerance like immediately after that. So I've just been when you talk about photography, I'm just thinking of D.W. Griffith and all the interesting things that he was up to. But let's talk about. Can we talk a bit about beauty as a transcendental?
Sure.
So a transcendental is this medieval philosophical concept. Probably, I don't know, it might even go back to Neoplatonism in some form, but it's a property of being. The idea being that there's all these things we talk about: goodness, truth, unity. Those are some of the commonly cited ones that exist wherever being exists. They are properties of being as such. And in their sort of divine source, they're all one. But insofar as we experience them or perceive them, they take on these different aspects. So beauty and being are one. Goodness, being is goodness, being is truth, etc. But we perceive them according to different sort of modalities. And so beauty, there's a debate over whether beauties are transcendental. Maritain thinks it is. I think it is. It's a property of being, therefore it's one of the divine attributes. Maritain, now he defines it as, he gives one definition being the splendor of forms. Some people will say the splendor of truth, the splendor of goodness. Maritain actually says at one point that beauty is the splendor of all the transcendentals taken together. But it you could say, you might say it's goodness insofar as it gives delight. So goodness satisfies the appetites of the will. But insofar as the contemplation of goodness brings delight to the intellect, that's like kind of the aspect under which we call it beauty. I don't know if I'm getting this right, but that's like my best attempt at explaining it.
Yeah. Okay. So transcendentals, everything that is beautiful. Everything that is true. So, I mean, you can go through these. Everything that is beautiful in that it gives delight. Everything is good in that it completes being or others. Everything that is true in that it can be known.
Right.
Everything that is one. So that's another transcendental. It's the least exciting one.
And these all participate in being in lesser degrees and like what the scholastics would say by way of analogy. So like we don't predicate good of some finite object in the same way that we predicate it as God. There's actually kind of like an infinite gap there, and yet they're sort of taking part in this in this ultimate transcendent goodness being truth.
Right. So what you're showing then when you make something beautiful, this is partly why I think photography qualifies, is you're showing being, okay? The clarity, the integrity, and the proportion is revealing a form. It's revealing the beingness of the thing, which I think photography does well if you can do it right. It's just your medium is different, and you don't have to, you know what I mean? We don't need to get stuck on photography anymore. But here's where it gets very interesting, is that the first cause becomes, because that's the thing that most of all is, So God is that which is. Okay? That's Moses' name for God that was revealed to him. I am the one who is. Okay? That means that God is also the one who is good, and the one who is true, and the one who is beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's a game changer if you have this metaphysics going into your art, that God is beautiful. And that changes how you understand everything connected to it, and it might change your thoughts on liturgy and what churches ought to look like, whether there ought to be churches,
It's going to make you aware of where art, of what art is leading you to potentially, and also of where art is coming from, where real art is coming from, what it's participating in.
So,
but
is rock and roll a fine art?
Probably not.
Can be. I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, honestly.
Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love.
The Lemon song.
I don't know, man.
I'm
kind of ambivalent about Zeppelin. I like it, but
well, so do I. But do I like it for the reasons that I like, Michelangelo's David?
I'd have to revisit it to examine.
Is it appealing to my passions, which is something that Maritain is not a huge fan of? Is it
as an aim, as a direct aim?
Yeah, as a direct aim.
It can be an effect.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with it.
Its effect. So about Romanticism, this is like page 61. Its effect is to produce emotion, but if it aims at emotion, at affecting or rousing the passions, it becomes adulterate, and another element of deceit thereby enters into it. So I listen to Whole Lotta Love, and I start thinking about Whole Lotta Love, and you have the thrumming beats of it, and the weird middle section, and all of that stuff in the lyrics. Is it delight at its clarity, or is it arousing passions?
It's arousing passions.
I'm willing to say that Led Zeppelin's not fine art, even though I love them.
We could probably come back to this later, but I had a pretty transformative experience as to my relationship with music, back in my late teens when I started listening to Charlie Parker, and it fundamentally transformed what I thought the purpose of listening to music was, precisely because I didn't feel anything when I listened to it, and I had to listen to it because I was trying to study jazz. And then eventually I started experiencing that delight that wasn't attached to, this is, I was a big metalhead in high school, and it wasn't attached to some specific emotion. It was Bill Evans, the great jazz pianist, says something very, I realized when I was looking at my notes, says something very, much in accord with what Maritain says, which is that I think he was talking about the earlier great jazz pianist Bud Powell, and he said something like, he makes something about the emotion that you feel when you listen to Bud Powell or Beethoven, and he said it's not like a facile everyday emotion that like some music might make you feel, like anger, sadness, like whatever. It's more just the sense of being in the presence of some kind of perfection, and I think that's very close to what Maritain is saying. So it is exactly what, and Thomas, that which being seen pleases. And it doesn't mean that your senses are always even being pleased, although usually that's the way it goes first. But your senses might be jangled while your intellect takes pleasure in a form. It might be a painting of a bloody battle, or or Shostakovich you mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. So
jangling.
So that kind of opens up, and when I started listening to Charlie Parker over and over again and singing along with his solos, and just listening to it, and it was almost like taking a retreat, like an ascetic experience, because I wasn't feeling anything because I had no frame of reference in this style of music. Eventually I grew to appreciate the style, in a more sort of basic way, but that actually opened up like this vast world of classical music and jazz and folk music to me, things that I wouldn't have listened to before because they didn't give me that feeling that I was looking for, feeling of usually a feeling of epicness or something.
Yeah, we did
I was going for.
I mean, we did a show just recently on the planets, which is a very accessible bit of classical music for newbies to come to orchestral music. And it's usually pretty obvious what you're supposed to feel.
Right. And Romanticism at its best has both, right? It actually has the beauty and it's accessible because it appeals to the passions.
Yeah, and Maritain deuces on Wagner, which makes me like him less, but, then I think, is he wrong? Wagner's like, you will feel this. Yep. I will make you feel this, with my musical power. And
Hitchcock too.
Yeah, and it's delightful, and I love it. And I might have said this. I ruined myself probably for a religious life by listening to the complete Ring cycle during a silent retreat. I wasn't silent. I was very bad.
Oh man.
And he does that to you, but then go listen to some Baroque stuff, or listen to Bach, or listen to Beethoven piano sonatas or something, and he's not going to insist that you feel something, although sometimes Beethoven does, but
and the cantatas, Bach might be going for a specific emotion, the passion.
I love the fugues because I can
for me, Bach is like as close to pure music as it gets. An instrumental piece by Bach, it is just pure form.
And you can float over it, and I can't tell you what dear listener, go listen to Unaccompanied Cello Suite in G major number 1. It's the one that everyone knows.
If I have a feeling from it, it's simply joy.
Yeah.
And it's not because of like how dissonant or consonant the music is.
And some days it might bring me to tears, and some days it might make me super happy.
Yeah.
Right. Which I was getting you when you were talking about Charlie Parker. It's just so complex and cool and everything, but it's not emotional.
Would you hear a little of Unaccompanied Cello Suite number 1?
I think it's more about, I say it's more about motion than it's about emotion.
Yeah. So
it's more about feel than it's about feeling.
Scott is going to cue up the piece I'm talking about.
Okay, now I'm mad. I can't hardly hear this without thinking of a Maxwell House commercial or something.
This is like the ultimate. Scott. This is like the ultimate. What's the Walker Percy essay you guys like to talk about?
Loss of the Creature.
It's that, right? It's essentially that secondhand.
Oh, you need
thing.
to discover this. So the way you need to listen to this, Scott, is that you need to be crawling across a field, and I'll just shoot a rifle over your head, and then you'll come across it.
Right.
And you'll hear it as you're in peril for your life, and you'll finally be able to hear it for the first time.
That's right. Yeah.
And I do know the thing, but that bugs me so much.
Yeah, but it's beautiful. I mean, I appreciate it, and even that first prelude in the Well-Tempered Clavier, it's like I've heard that a million times, but man, if you just listen to how he changes one note at a time, it's like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this like thing about emotion is very important because we are mired in emotionalism. So you were talking about didactic art. You were talking about didactic modern art, and it's like everything is these two extremes in modern culture. It's like one of two. It's like the angel bestialism that Walker Percy talks about, right? In Love in the Ruins, which I read recently. It's like it's either super conceptual and detached from intuition, or it's like just the intuition of like
Won't
base
you think
emotion.
of the children? That's the guiding principle of a lot of art.
And so I think that there's a huge amount of emotionalism, and I think perhaps nowhere more than in music and in pop music now. I think perhaps no other art form has been. A lot of art forms have been pretty degraded, but in terms of emotionalism, music has been kind of the most, and not even rising to the level of emotions. Now just like physical sensations, right? Like at least an emotion has like a kind of an intellectual component in a way. It's like just the passions,
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for people to get beyond that, and that will also help people to be willing to go beyond out of their comfort zone and be willing to try something that doesn't just tweak them in an immediate way and beat them over the head, which is another phrase Bill Evans used to talk about, pop music.
And when you create music, know what you're or anything, know what you're trying to do. Maritain says
right
that the great art causes the emotional response, but it doesn't. But its object is not to do that. It's in the beauty that is created by the great art that the emotional response responds to. So if you are yanking everybody's emotional chain, you're not necessarily creating art. So
you should be playing the sounds that you hear in your soul, in your inner ear. That's
when you
what
write
it
the
is.
Screenplay for Old Yeller, and you're like, man, I'm going to make these kids cry. Right? It's not great art. You're screwing
Now, there's a
with
certain
people.
rhetoric. Hitchcock said that that was his goal, and I kind of wonder. I like Hitchcock, but I kind of wonder about the utility of that, just making the audience feel whatever you want them to feel at any given moment. But at least, there's also the argument that maybe storytelling is not an art of the beautiful. Maybe it's a useful art. So maybe that kind of emotional rhetoric can actually serve a purpose. I'm not sure. That's all over Birth of the Nation, which I just watched. It gave me a lot to think about in terms of the ability of art to manipulate your emotions and deceive you, right? But yeah, so I think all of these things can be very useful to the listener. I mean, this book is perhaps it's for philosophers first of all, and then maybe for artists secondly, and then for the users of art thirdly.
I would reorder that. I mean, I think it's for the doer and the maker. The three of us have the benefit of having read Aristotle and Aquinas and kind of being steeped in this language and this way of thinking.
I've never read Aristotle.
You haven't?
You will.
No,
that's a show, everybody.
See, here's the thing, Scott, is I've actually gotten most of my Aristotle and Aquinas secondhand from reading books like this on art, essentially by Thomistic philosophers of
Thomas,
art.
where are you in the program? What are you reading now at OGB?
We're finishing Thucydides, which I'm thankful for.
Right.
The Sicilian campaign was amazing. The rest of it was a real slog for me. So we're getting back to the Timaeus.
You should
next,
just read a
really
book about it.
Yeah.
He'll be getting
Thomas.
to Aristotle very soon.
Yes, I'm named Thomas, but I'm named after Thomas More, and Utopia is even further off in the distance.
Oh, well,
I've been taught about Aristotle. I just have not read Aristotle firsthand. I've read articles from the Summa, but not Aristotle.
You're going to be loving it because he's already singing. He's singing your song that you already have. But
can I go to the converse of this, because I mentioned this angelism, bestialism, right? So the converse of this is that it's also not conceptual. It's not emotional and it's not conceptual. Did you guys read the footnotes?
I tried not to.
I did not. I'm sorry.
Maritain's footnotes, a couple of them are a couple pages long, and they're really, really good and have some really key stuff for me anyway. So going back to this, that which being seen pleases, that this is intuitive knowledge is hugely important. For a couple of reasons. First, just to give one of my thoughts on it. Oh, wait. So actually, just to wrap up the transcendental thing, because one of the reasons I brought it up, is one of the implications that everything in existence is beautiful. And when you're talking about art, some people I've heard some people object, well, beauty can't be a transcendental because not every work of art is beautiful.
That's upside down.
But I would say every form has a splendor, but not every work of art is a form that's greater than the sum of the forms that make up its parts. So sometimes the beauty in a bad work of art that's not really a work of art might just be the beauty of the colors, the individual colors that makes it up, but it's not greater than the sum of its parts. That's how I would explain that. So the actual thing, the actual materials that the artist is using, they are beautiful. It's just that he didn't succeed in making a form that coheres.
Well, and it might only be beautiful in that it covers up that spot on your wall. I feel
like that's a lot of the art of mural, is just to cover up ugly buildings. I mean, murals are great, but I live in the city and I'm that wouldn't have needed a mural if that was a beautiful building, to make this the inner city less depressing.
That was a New York thing you just said, by the way.
A New York thing. Oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
I live in the city. Which city?
Oklahoma City.
I didn't just mean, I meant cities generically, but yes, fair enough. All right. But they do the same thing in San Francisco. But so to go to the thing about intuition, in my opinion, one of the great things that there's a number of great things that contemplating beautiful art does for us. One of them is giving us an experience of doing something for its own sake, which is kind of like a foretaste of like the ultimate contemplative end of man. Another of them is that because we experience art through the senses, yet in an intuitive way and not via abstraction, it's this very unique form of knowledge for human beings. And in my opinion, it's the form of knowledge that brings us, of contemplation, that brings us closest to the angelic mode of knowing, where everything is known in a flash of intuition, even intellectual matters. Because it's a spiritual knowledge. Our knowledge of beauty is, our experience of beauty is spiritual, but it's without abstraction, it's without discourse. But it also most fully integrates the animal and the spiritual sides of us because they're working together seamlessly. And it's not like I have this sense knowledge and now I have to abstract from it and do like a syllogism to make something of it. It happens in this like unified flash of experience.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. So there's some Thomism to unpack there. So angels, if there are any such thing, are intellectual beings. Okay, I'm talking to the audience here, and since they are not material, they don't know things through discursive steps of logic. The things that they know by their nature. Okay, and St. Thomas says somewhere that things at the highest things of the lower orders imitate the lowest things of the higher orders. So like a really smart dog is a little bit like a has some human type actions.
Like a dumb person.
Like a really dumb person. So the heights of human activity approach angelic. And so even if you don't think there are any angels that, dear listener, you can get what we're getting at here, that you see the beautiful work of art. You're not sitting there thinking, this must be beautiful because it contains, these 5 qualities that make good art. No, you're being bowled over by beauty. You're getting it in one look. Or let me compare it to the master craftsman that Scott was talking about earlier, the guy that comes out to your job site and says, do this. Probably isn't thinking about it in a discursive way, but is seeing the land and saying, this is what it needs in one go. That's approaching angelic. And that's what great art can do for you.
And, for the Christians out there, Maritain's also going to make an analogy between art and grace. And he sort of inspiration on the natural level and grace on the supernatural level. And he's also going to say in a number of different places that kind of the contemplation of beauty is kind of the closest thing we get in the natural order to mystical experience, in that it's analogically speaking in how they operate, not in their end, but in how they operate, because they both proceed so intensely by purely by connaturality, where you become like one with the thing that you're contemplating. I think he says that the mystic knows everything through love, whereas the contemplator of beauty, it kind of goes in the reverse because he's stirred to love by the beauty of the thing, whereas the mystic almost proceeds directly into everything else through love. But I don't know. I thought that was worth saying because it gives a sense of how, yes, we're talking about a virtue that seeks the good of the thing made, but it also has all these analogs to other parts of human experience and helps us to understand the value of simply looking at something and contemplating it and not having your head filled with thoughts, for example.
Yeah. Thoughts get in the way of beauty.
Yeah. Well, Brian Blade, one of my favorite jazz drummers, says something like, not to deny that jazz is the thinking man's art, but every time I'm listening to music and I catch myself thinking, like, I know there's something wrong. I want to take a look at footnote 55, if you guys don't mind. I don't know if it's 55 in your edition.
This is a pet peeve. Jacques, put it in the main text.
Yeah.
I'm not a footnote.
His footnotes are essentially some of them are essentially might as well be appendices.
Right. I would mark him wrong if he were in my class. I'd say, put it in the main text.
Well, it's a good thing you quit being a college professor then, Karl.
C+, Jacques. That's your grade.
Footnote 55 is rather long, but it's also rather important. And I want to I guess you guys can just stop me when when I've gone too far into it. But I want to bring it up because it gets into this intuitive knowledge and this lack of conceptual experience in art, in the arts of the beautiful. I think probably above all in instrumental music, but I think it's very important because people of an intellectual bent tend to want to analyze everything and kind of overthink it and not just sort of be vulnerable and allow this thing to have its way with them, so to speak. So footnote 55, if, owing to the nature of the intellect, it is normal that the perception of the beautiful be accompanied by the presence or the outline of a concept, however confused, and that it suggests ideas, nevertheless, this is not what formally constitutes it. The splendor or radiance of the form glittering in the beautiful object is not presented to the mind by a concept or an idea, but rather by the sensible object intuitively grasped, in which there is transmitted, as through an instrumental cause, this radiance of a form. Thus one may say that in the perception of the beautiful, the intellect is through the means of the sensible intuition itself, and he's going to use this term, the intelligentiated sense, to talk about how we get beautiful through the sense knowledge. Placed in the presence of a radiant intelligibility, which insofar as it produces the joy of the beautiful cannot be disengaged or separated from its sense matrix, and consequently does not procure an intellectual knowledge expressible in a concept. Contemplating the object and the intuition which sense has of it, the intellect enjoys a presence, the radiant presence of an intelligible which does not reveal itself to the eyes such as it is. If it turns away from sense to abstract and reason, it turns away from its joy and loses contact with this radiance. So he's going to move on and talk about the value that conceptualization may have in helping us to understand a work of art, appreciate the work of art better, but it's not something that you should be doing in the midst of contemplation. It's something to do before or after, probably preferably after, at least first experiencing a work. And so,
let me translate all that.
Go ahead.
Hang on. Let me translate all that.
Sorry.
Beauty is not conceptual for Maritain, and it is not necessarily rational on its face, and does not necessarily contain an idea. It is experiential.
Yeah.
Later on, you may be able to analyze it and, and I don't know, project concept onto it or whatever, but it is experiential first.
Right. And it's not rational in the sense that it's not discursive reason. It's not that it's not intellectual, because part of the problem here, I think that part of the problem that we have that causes a lack of beauty in modern times is probably the reduction of the intellect to reason, right? So like discursive reason and analysis, not contemplation, not something that might be above words, if that makes sense. So I think that it's important. I don't think anybody else has used this, but I call it super rational. It's intellectual, but it's super rational. It's not supernatural, but it proceeds in an intuitive way, in the soul. that does not require sort of a chain of reasoning or words.
So when we do the Music and Ideas podcast, and we talk in concepts about music, we use concepts about music, we're not, at least I'm not thinking that somehow I'm going to prove to you that something's beautiful. That
Right,
can't be
yeah.
done. What I'm doing is pointing.
Giving people a way in.
Well, you can't look at music, but look at this part of the planets when Holst does this. And I might explain some bits about what he's doing. But all of that is not to say, look, he's repeating the theme in the winds now that he had. That doesn't mean, therefore, it's beautiful.
Right. It might give someone something to listen for.
Yeah.
And you guys are also talking not just about pure musical beauty, but you're also situating the things in the culture. You're talking about the lyrics, all these different things. But even if you're talking about theory or composition or something, it's not about proving. It's not like that's a replacement for the experience of the music, It may be an obstacle as much. It could become an obstacle. I mean, look, I went to music school and that kind of did a number on my ability to listen to music without like thinking about whether I could do that or not, and then getting intimidated and stressed out or what, possibly, or inspired, hopefully. But it took me a while to recover that kind of like that simple joy in listening to music. And I think that was a disservice that my education did me in that respect.
Well, Maritain told you don't do that.
Yeah.
Should have just
Start
been
your
an apprentice.
novitiate now. Right.
Should have just knocked on Herbie Hancock's door and said, hey, I want to be your apprentice.
Hey, Herb. The normal dude in the United States is not equipped to deal with art, right? Because we try to put a concept on it, whatever that is. Like, why are people buying this? Like, what's the value of this? What's the economic value of this? Why are they doing it? You just spurg out with, trying to put a framework, a rational framework on fine art that will then allow you to, put it in a cubby hole with all the other objects you hold in your mind, with all the other concepts you hold in your mind. And I don't know if that's a new thing or not, but I know it's real. That's a real problem that we have. I can't figure out anything about ballet. It's the most absurd thing I can imagine. Conceptually, it's insane. But I understand that some people watch these women walk around on their toes and are moved by it. It is completely inaccessible to me. But I also know people, a lot of my friends are engineers who they cannot get anything out of Miles Davis or Bach. And that's a big problem. So if you try to conceptualize these experiences, you're probably going to fail, and then your judgment will be that the experience was garbage, and not see that maybe it was your lens was broken. And it will probably make you very susceptible to that stuff that is just strictly emotive, that stuff that's just supposed, it's got jump scares in it and it's just there to mess with you. That's not good. So beware. And this is why, I won't do that. But you've got to be wary of that as a modern dude. I was going to shoot on Glenn Gould, but
oh no,
yeah,
I love Glenn Gould.
How? Everybody.
He's the only person I'll listen to play Bach on the piano.
Oh my! He is the Elon Musk of piano. Everybody's like, "Oh, he's brilliant." He's not. He's terrible, Thomas.
No, he's incredible, man.
Brandenburg Concertos by Gould is painful.
I've never listened to his Brandenburgs, but
he is
but
so
he
wooden. He is so wooden, and
I don't think so. I think he's rhythmically like propulsive and
repulsive.
No, I'll listen to Glenn Gould on piano, and if it's not Glenn Gould on piano, it has to be someone on harpsichord.
Oh.
I will listen to nobody else play Bach on the piano.
Well, I stand by it. He is the Elon Musk of piano.
He's my favorite classical pianist. Granted, I only know like 2 classical pianists, but
Well, that's like saying Budweiser's your favorite beer. You need to drink more beer.
no, it's not like saying Budweiser's your favorite beer.
I don't know.
Listen, I drink all those sour beers that you guys have such contempt for.
Yeah.
I'm far gone. Far gone.
Yeah, these metropolitans, Karl.
Only craft beers for me, thank you.
So on Saturday nights, we often have gatherings here at the Hambrick place. It started out with like a few kids, and then there are my kids' friends, and then their parents would come, and like we had 24 people here last Saturday, and we set out these tables out in front of the building. And it gets dark, and I light some kerosene lamps, and a card game goes over here, and then there's a chess game over there, and then other people just talking over here. Well, some new people showed up last weekend, and I say, hey, there are drinks in that little fridge over there, and the bathroom's over there, and, welcome. He goes over to the fridge, and the guy comes back. He's like, I don't know who would buy a Busch Light. I said, dude, it's my fridge.
Well, that's not very nice of him.
And he's like, oh. Anyway.
I don't know if I've ever drunk a Busch. If I did, it would have been when I literally the first beer I ever drank or something. I think I started with Blue Moon because that was what my brothers-in-law would drink.
Started with Blue Moon. Wow.
My brothers-in-law would drink that on family occasions, so that would be the beer that I was given to drink before I was of age to drink. Was Blue Moon.
Yeah, I don't want my beer to be an experience.
I want my beer to be asymptotically converging on wine in quality.
The IPA, the craft beers, these are the romanticism of beer.
I don't like IPAs.
I will make you feel an emotion through this beer.
Right.
Rather than the delicate Bach-like flavor of American lagers. Yeah.
Well, my friend said to me, James, who co-hosts the film podcast you guys came on, we went to an Austrian restaurant on near the 9/11 memorial on September 11th and got this Stiegel, this Austrian beer that's probably like Budweiser for them, and it's just like the ideal perfect beer. And he's like, you know what? Like German or Austrian beer is just like rather have the most basic Austrian or German beer any day than any American craft beer. And I kind of have to agree with them. It's just incredible.
So America's got a continental climate, which is not a European climate. It gets hot in the middle of the country. It gets really, really hot. And the beers that were developed, I mean, there's historical reasons, but, a Busch Light on a hot day in Oklahoma is the beer to have. It's you don't want to be dazzled with complexities of flavor. You're thirsty.
The colder the better for that sort of thing. Yeah, the colder the beer is,
and especially when you make a red beer out of it, like I do anyway.
Yeah, you mix it with tomato juice or Bloody Mary mix or something. We're getting off topic.
Which is the best thing to do. No, we're not. This is all. You can't conceptualize the Busch Light.
Well, listen, Aquinas says that the beautiful only pertains to the senses of the sensible beauty only pertains to the senses of sight and hearing. I'll quote him: among all the senses, it is to the sense of sight and the sense of hearing only that the beautiful relates, because these two senses are maximae cognoscitivi.
They are the most cognitive, the most.
Yes. But here's something really cool. Maritain footnote. It is permissible to conjecture that in glorified bodies, all the senses intellectualized may be of use in the perception of the beautiful. And I was like, that sounds awesome. So when we're all raised from the dead in our glorified bodies, our sense of smell might be just as intelligent.
Go smell a symphony.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds awesome to me.
Yeah, I bet Glenn Gould smelled bad too.
No, man, he was a germaphobe, so he probably smelled like a baby's butt, man.
I can't get over him humming while he plays the stuff.
It's better than Keith Jarrett's humming, though.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
He's at least singing. He's actually singing, not just grunting. Oh man, he's so good, dude. So good.
I have his Goldberg variations. But I have other Goldberg variations too.
Yeah, I just have the well-tempered clavier and the 2 and 3 part inventions, but that's like all I've needed so far because there's just so much. And
my current favorite pianist is, I probably could pronounce it wrong, Evgeny Kissin.
Yeah, I've heard good things.
There is he was young. He did a performance of Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. You can find it on YouTube. I never knew a piano could do that stuff. It's just fantastic. Highly recommended.
Glenn Gould kind of did have the personality of an Elon Musk. I will admit that. I wrote a paper on Glenn Gould's approach in the studio, which is really fascinating. And there's definitely something of the tech nerd to his approach. Mm-hmm. But the musical results to me are
robotic and much
unsurpassed.
Oh. This book, I'll go back to it. You said that, it's for the philosopher first. I don't think so. I think it is for the maker. I really do. If you are a maker, if you build cabinets, if you paint, whatever, I think this is worth your time. If you don't read this kind of stuff, if you don't have the sort of the bones of Aristotle and Thomas in you already, where you don't know these words, you don't know what the causes are, and some, what a telos is or a final cause and all that, it'll bump you, and it'll be rough sledding for a little while. But I think it's worth it for you. This guy loves you for what you do. He says that the ennui of the modern world falls away at the doorstep of your studio or your shop, and right. People that have made things and done real things know that that's true. And he glorifies the regular maker in the book. And he glorifies the fine art as well, and he's able to do both without denigrating one or the other. In few of the last 60 years, and this is before that, but can do that.
Yeah, and he even will criticize specific movements while giving due to as they say in Jurassic Park. I said this in other podcasts recently. Life finds a way. He kind of says that like an artist can make good art.
The quote goes like this: "Life finds a way."
Thank you. He has this later in a section on the rules of art, which is I think the next section after Art and Beauty, where he talks about artists being able, or it's in a footnote actually. He talks about artists being able to be good in spite of their system and in spite of their like conscious views on art. Whereas he says a philosopher, if his system's bad, he's a bad philosopher. Too bad, But he says, when we speak of an artist or a poet, we should always be careful not to miss the virtue which may be in either, not to offend something naturally sacred. And I think that sensitivity that he has is one of his greatest strengths in approaching art as a philosopher, that he's able to give everything its due, which was really, so much of what makes Aquinas great as well. But Maritain's able to do this also in regards to the historical art movements of his time. He's able to see, where Cubism gets it right and where it gets it wrong, and what surrealist artist makes something beautiful in spite of the fact that his system is based on a lie that situates the source of art in the subconscious instead of, in the soul. For example. And so because it's this intuitive process and not a conceptual process, the artist may be making good art in spite of his concepts.
Yeah. And then all in all, once you get to the end of this, you realize, oh, Maritain just told me why all art has sucked since 1700.
Since 17 what?
Since 1700. The visual arts. I mean, he basically, he does that. He really does. He's... because it has lost sight of the center of the art, the experience of art, which is the soul. It got divorced from that, and it has not. And the visual arts have not recovered from it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Maritain in another of his books, I think it's in a footnote, in another of his books, Creative Intuition in Art and Poetry, he decries this tendency to see art as a symptom of cultural decline. So this was the dominant ideology in this culture, and therefore I must interpret all the art made in this time period in this place as a symptom of that ideology, instead of sort of seeing how art has its own independent spiritual laws which govern it. And if somebody has the gift and is willing to be docile to it, he actually can transcend the time and his human limitations. And I think that again, that's one of his great strengths. But it also applies to looking at the different art forms. So the different art forms follow different historical paths. And I would say music, in some ways, Bach, Bach dies in 1750, right? 1685 to 1750, I think. So Bach is flourishing, during the Enlightenment period when philosophy is taking a nosedive. But I don't think Bach's music is good because it's the Enlightenment. I think it's a momentum that started in the Catholic Middle Ages, going through chant to polyphony. And actually, I don't think it reaches its peak in Catholic polyphony. I kind of think that the closest equivalent to Aquinas and Dante in music is this Protestant musician. And that's a remarkable thing. And it goes to show you how art transcends the conceptual system in which it exists.
Just because he's Lutheran doesn't mean he's bad.
Right. Well, there's a lot of great Lutheran, church music too, but
sure.
That
was a callback to the beginning of the book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Here's a difficult question, Karl. What are we going to read for the next show?
I don't know.
Boethius, guys, Boethius.
I'm reading Consolation of Philosophy for my home book group for next month.
Oh, nice. That's cool. You guys only read modern things on here. What's up with that?
Well, we try not to read anything that's on our list at Online Great Books because we don't want.
I see. That makes it harder. You did Gawain. That was good. It was a fun show.
Yeah, and we did some things early on that we cover in our Online Great Books program, but we tried to kind of stay away from those as much as we could.
Right.
Karl,
because what would happen is the wonderful people that join us at Online Great Books, which you can do at onlinegreatbooks.com.
Yeah.
Right? Am I missing a / or something?
Yeah, you can do it there.
Yeah. Tell my listeners about it because I already told your listeners about my stuff.
Oh, yeah. So we have this thing, Online Great Books, where we send you books, the great books, and you read them, and then we host seminars for you that you can do in the privacy of your own home, and you talk about the books. It's not a class, it's a seminar. You're expected to contribute. It's really awesome. It's very much fun. I love doing them. It's a lot of fun. But the danger is if the owner of Online Great Books and me talk about a book that you're going to read on the list, well, then some of the high-achieving OGB members will go listen to that podcast and say, that's what I should think about Aristotle.
Yeah, and even if they don't want to parrot that, I don't want to do the Walker, step on Walker Percy there and just spoil the book for them. I just don't want to do that. And so we've tried to stay away from that stuff and sort of be great books adjacent. We also sneak in books that we just want to read. And since we're oppressed by reading for all these responsibilities that we have, we try to sneak some stuff in that we want.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, Scott finally getting through Lord of the Rings and
made
it.
He forced
that
it.
was
Really
really
consensual.
cool. Yeah, you guys should do the Silmarillion. Scott will probably hate that, but
is it 10,000 pages? Because if it is, Karl probably wants to.
It's not that long. It's shorter than Lord of the Rings, but it's also harder to read than Lord of the Rings.
It's written in the style of the Bible.
But it's more like the length. It's more like the length of one of the volumes of Lord of the Rings, probably.
It's got some high points, but it's a little weird. I don't know. I honestly came here. I didn't have a book in mind. I forgot my number one task when doing a podcast with Scott is I need to know what the next thing is. But you'd suggested that thing about, what was that, 10 Acres and a Mule book?
10 Acres Enough by Edmund Morris.
I thought that might be fun.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, it's not a book of ideas. It's more, I don't know, maybe it is. They all are, aren't they? Maybe. Yeah, we can do that. We can read 10 Acres Enough. It was written, I don't know, about 1865 or something like that by a guy who was a mechanic in Philadelphia. He called himself a mechanic, so he was working on steam engines and power plants and things for people that were in manufacturing business. And he left all that behind and bought an 11-acre farm in New Jersey. And it's about how he did that and how he and his wife managed the home, the oikos.
Practical distributism.
Did you guys ever do Xenophon's Economicus? Sorry, it just made me think of that.
No, we have not.
That's really fun. That's really fun.
Sell it.
Yes.
Well, okay. So the part that I remember, so it's mostly because it's Xenophon. It's a Socratic dialogue by Xenophon, and Socrates is a little less Socratic in the Xenophon dialogues. So he's mostly listening to this gentleman farmer and just asking him questions and learning from him about how he manages his household so wisely. And I just remember the part where the gentleman farmer explains how he convinced his wife to stop using cosmetics, and I just thought it was like so awesome. It's really great. It's delightful.
Was it because they're fraud and she shouldn't perpetrate fraud? Is that why?
Essentially, but he gives this great argument and like totally wins her over. And he's like, well, instead of, doing that, you should exercise yourself by, caring for the household. And then your skin will have a nicer, tone and like, it's funny. It's delightful. It's true. It's good.
Here are a couple others, Karl. I had a guy recommend The Conquest of Bread by Kropotkin. Kropotkin. It was written in 1906. This guy is a Russian anarcho-communist. And that looks mighty interesting. I had that one recommended. I think that could be a great deal of fun. Walter Lippmann's The Basic Problem of Democracy, 12 pages. Lippmann was a a monster that was a big influence on Bernays. The Basic Problem of Democracy. And then, of course, I think that, Bernays' essay, the 8-page little essay, The Engineering of Consent, is probably something that we should get at some point, too. The Conquest of Bread, Karl.
You guys should someday read The Intellectual Life, Its Spirit, Conditions, Methods by Antonin Gilbert Sertillange, French Dominican, inspired by a possibly apocryphal letter by Aquinas giving his advice to a student, and his like rules for the intellectual life. And it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's like from everything, the highest spiritual levels of the intellectual life to like the diet an intellectual have. He's like, don't heavily season your food because an intellectual does not spend his life in the process of digestion, stuff like that. It's fantastic.
Benjamin Franklin's the same way.
I really want to inflict Heidegger.
Oh gosh.
What is metaphysics?
All right.
His lecture from 1929.
How long is this? 700 pages.
It's 10 pages.
Okay.
But you'll hate it. It'll be fun.
Karl loves that. He loves to hurt me.
But we can do that 10-acre thing. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it's great fun, and it's really interesting. And you just see the man and his family just like grow in joy as he tells the story of them doing this. It's a delight, and it's just a very smart guy, but just a regular guy, just chronicling what he did without any flourish. It's just
practical art,
just an honest account. Yeah, it's good.
So I think you guys liked this book. That's the impression I get at the end of this discussion.
Art and Scholasticism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
You never had you didn't criticize a single point he made, so it sounded like you were just suspicious because of other stuff.
I do like this book. it was really hard for me to get through, though. Like stylistically, I mean, there are nuggets in there. The thing about crossing the threshold of the studio or shop, and the chunk that Karl read about beauty. There are some wonderful nuggets in here, but most of this is just it's really dry. It was very difficult for me to get through this. It was difficult for me to hold my attention on it and to digest it. Part of that is because the universe is oppressing me right now, but some of it was his fault. For sure.
I read this thing for the first time when I was probably like 20, and it was my first thing by him. And a lot of the terminology went over my head. And in the past decade or so, I've read a bunch of his other writings on art multiple times. And so coming back to it now, which was just my first time revisiting it since the very first time I read it, it was a lot easier after getting all this other Aquinas sort of by osmosis through other writers. It was easier to approach.
I liked it because I already pretty much agreed with it. But my critique, which I didn't do too much, I did a little bit at the beginning, is there's so much metaphysical framework that's required to get what he's talking about that I think is just so foreign for most people. I had a comment here. I was going to talk about why Christian rock is terrible with reference to this book, but
well, he has a whole section on Christian art.
Yeah,
that give you,
which it's all right.
We discussed like half of the book in depth and then touched on a few.
Yeah,
other points.
but I wrote a note. I said, do we need pagan art? And what I mean by that is as a propedeutic, as an introduction to beauty itself. I think it would be
to be able to recognize it independent of its subject matter.
I mean, some of the people on the right are getting very much into aesthetics these days, and they're not Christian really, but I think it's still a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like the all of the right wing bodybuilders,
to a large extent.
But
a lot of
Phidias existed, okay? The Greeks had fine arts, and they prepared the way for other things to come. So if you're, I think a general sense of beauty, I think you're an ally. It's gonna. I think we're metaphysical best friends if you believe in beauty.
Well, we already do that with philosophy, right? And, Catholic seminary, your first 4 years of philosophy, you don't even study theology until your fifth year. So maybe the similar thing with, and actually that's one thing Maritain says in the section on Christian art. He's like, even if you're going to be working in sacred art, don't jump to that right away. Learn your craft and just make art.
Yep. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean your art's not going to suck.
Karl, let's read 10 Acres Enough, and then let's read your Heidegger, What is Metaphysics? Because everything is metaphysics. If you don't know what stuff is, you can't think about it. You can't think about it properly. You can't act properly, and most of the problems that we have, I think, are basically metaphysical. Most of the political problems.
Well, and if Heidegger's of any value, he's of value in pointing out the hiddenness of metaphysics in the modern age.
Can I make a quick recommendation to your listeners? If this book sounded intimidating to you, but you're interested in the subject matter, this is Maritain's most technical and most heavily explicitly scholastic work on art. The easiest one to read is The Responsibility of the Artist, probably partially because it's basically lectures he gave. It's much less technical, and I think people would really enjoy that. The Creative Intuition in Art and Poetry is his last big work on art, and I think that's from the early 60s, and that is great, and it's not super scholastic, but it's also pretty almost esoteric in some of the language he uses. So I would recommend The Responsibility of the Artist. It's quite short, and I would say quite an easy read. And it's basically expanding on the stuff in that last chapter on art and morality.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. This was really fun.
Yeah, always is. Thank you guys so much for listening. Go subscribe. Some of you haven't subscribed. If you've listened this long and you haven't subscribed yet, I don't know what to tell you. And then also go listen to the Catholic Culture podcast. It's not all what you think it is. And if you're Catholic, you should be listening to it anyway. Yeah. And if you're not, don't be scared of it. I'm not Catholic. They have me on there. It's crazy. I've been on the Catholic.
Yeah, well,
Man
you guys
show.
will have to come back and do another movie with us on Criteria, maybe early next year or something.
Mad Max Fury Road.
That I freaking love that movie. Do you like that movie?
Yes.
I've watched it so many times now. It's so great. Oh man, we probably will discuss it on something just because I actually watched the trailer recently again, and I actually teared up. Not because of any. Goes back to that emotion thing we were discussing. It wasn't because of any emotion the trailer made me feel. It was because I was just so stoked that something so excellent was made in my time. I actually got it. Yeah, it was great.
I watched it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm like, I didn't get it. It went past me. I don't know.
Didn't get it.
I don't know. All right. Well, there's that. Go check this out. If you make stuff, you should care about why making things are good and how to make things good, which is not to say necessarily well, but make things good, make things that are good, and make everything better. And I think he can show you a way. So go check that out, and we'll talk to you in another couple weeks.